Let me just start off by explaining how cross-site scripting works. Now, if earlier you listened to the interview, you'd find out that Lisa Moon is actually a combination of cross-site scripting and SQL injection. So we'll tackle cross-site scripting first. Now, you probably would have heard about client-side scripting like JavaScript, server-side scripting like ASP, PHP. Now, the main difference is, of course, a server-side script would run on the server and return back an equivalent HTML page back to the user. A client script, for example, would download onto the user's browser and then run locally on the machine. Cross-site scripting is a bit of both, where the script could sit on the server invoking a command on the client, and the client would now run it with his or her permissions. So, for example, if I've got a website that's vulnerable to cross-site scripting, let's just say Britney.com, yeah, and in here you've got a page, let's say download, all right, .php, and there is a variable on this page, for example, that would be, for example, maybe file, right? Now, if I would want to pipe a cross-site scripting attack onto this page, I would use a syntax something like this. I would say script, right? And maybe just use a simple alert, and say we love cross-site scripting. Yep. Now, and of course, close the script tag. Now, the two ways of this type of cross-site scripting attacks. One is, of course, what we call as a reflected. If I were to send this as a link to someone on emails, for example, let's say I receive this as an email, maybe part of a competition. Hey, you've won this vacation getaway. Please click here to redeem your prize, right? And within this link, there is a script such as this. Now, when I click on it, I send a request to Britney.com, and Britney.com now instructs me to execute the script. And now I run it with my permissions. My browser understands this perfectly fine, right? It understands that, hey, there is an alert box that I need to pop up, and I need to say VLove or XSS. So, for example, I could also now redirect this to a third-party page, which is what exactly happens in Lisa Moon, right? It now redirects you to a third-party page, which hosts the malicious or the rogue antivirus file, which now downloads onto your machine. Now, the sad part about this is there is no permission issues because your browser is always elevated, right? And there's always system privilege in that sense, right? I could also do something malicious. I mean, in this case, in these examples that I'm going to show you, I'm just going to use a simple alert box. I could also say things like maybe I could just even invoke a Windows scripting host, right? I could do something like this if I want to, right? wsh.run and do whatever I want to do, right? I don't know, cmd.exe and da-da-da-da, right? And of course I could say format your drive or net user, create a user account. So there's endless possibilities with this. Every programmer knows that he could do whatever he wants within the script tag, right? So there's a lot of danger in this, right? Let me just show you some examples of some major sites that are vulnerable to this cross-site scripting attack. One, for example, is you would probably have seen. I'm just going to show you this example of this website called certmag.com. Very famous for IT certification resources. They're quite a big site, Certification Magazine. Now, this particular site also has a vulnerability. If I look at it here, I'm just going to copy this little syntax here. And I'm going to post it, and I'm going to say this. I'm going to say, under the search, as a query, I'm going to pipe in this script. Right? It shouldn't work, right, in reality, but it's going to work, right? Well, in this case, of course, I'm just going to say Britney likes you, right? Let me just do that here. And if it pops up, this site is vulnerable. Britney likes you. So there, that's basically a way you could test if your site is vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Now, of course, I could do a lot of other malicious things. I'm just going to show you something that's not so harmful. And you also probably would have heard about this big attack on PlayStation networks and stuff like that. So I'm going to show you even on PlayStation. Here's another attack on PlayStation's site on the US. Yeah, this is webusplaystation.com. I'm going to do something similar as well. And if you look at that, the same thing, right? Maybe in this case, instead of alerting XSS, I'm going to say, oops, I did it again, right? And there it goes again. So this is a confirmation that this site is also vulnerable to cross-site scripting. Now, of course, a real malicious user isn't going to go around popping up script alert boxes, but he's probably going to use it for something more malicious, right? Placing a virus code, malicious code, planting a keylogger, a Trojan, stuff like that, right? And what happens is this could be used as a part of a drive-by attack. So when I infect one site, for example, like PlayStation, millions of users are going to be visiting that site. Every user that visits that site or reads that blog post is going to be infected. That's what's going to happen. Now, apart from that, the other part of Lisa Moon is also SQL injection. And SQL injection, I think a lot of people will probably have heard about SQL injection. Some even swear by it and say it's a myth, right? It's a fantasy, it doesn't work anymore. But in a nutshell, if you look at a basic SQL injection, every page, usually a login page, for example, would probably have username and would probably have a password box, correct? And at the back of that page, a programmer would have probably written something like a SQL select statement. I'll just put in a simple SQL select statement, maybe, I don't know, select everything from whatever table it is, yeah, whatever table it could be called, from login or whatever, yeah, if the table is called login, where, let's say, for the username, the programmer would have given a name for that variable. Maybe he calls it uname, for example, equals to something. And for password, maybe, I don't know, maybe he calls it PW or PWD, whatever it is. Right, equals to something. And of course, this statement could keep on going down. Right? You could have like, having, and stuff like that. But in a nutshell, if I were to enter my username is Brittany and my password is Kevin, right? What's going to happen is it's going to be replaced here, correct? It's going to replace it here, and Kevin's going to be replaced here. So when you read this sentence, it makes sense. I mean, select everything from this login table if it starts looking for a username called Brittany. If it exists, it checks whether the password is Kevin. If it is, it says welcome. If not, get lost, right? So that's how a simple, basic authentication works. Now, how a malicious hacker would now make use of this to sort of exploit SQL injection would be to use some syntax like this. For example, I've got a couple of basic SQL injection syntax down here. Let me just make it a little bit bigger. Now, these are simple SQL injection syntax. Now, if you look at, let me just pick up a simple example like this, a or 1 equals to 1. Now, if someone were to replace this on a box, yeah, like this, and replace it in the password box as well, now this information is going to be filled into that SQL select statement as well, right? Now, if you read it again, you'd find that it says select everything from login where the username equals to A or 1 equals to 1. Now, is 1 equals to 1? It's always equals to 1. So that's correct. And password is A or 1 equals to 1. Is 1 equals to 1? It is. So welcome, you're logged in. So that's how you sort of trick the database into letting you in. Alright? The reality is, of course, a lot of people say that, oh my god, that means my database is so vulnerable. It's not really a database issue because the database understands this statement. The problem is these inputs were not validated from the user. So it was more of a programming mistake rather than a database issue. The database right now thinks that this OR was keyed in by the programmer. Right? I could now manipulate this in any way I want. I could now put this here and say dash dash. That is a comment line for SQL statements. So what happens is when that happens, it gets replaced here, which means the rest is all commented out and it's gone. I could now turn around and do something else, like maybe I could even say drop a particular table. No problem, it'll drop the whole table, right? So I could do anything I want from the login screen. Now that's the basic injection. You could now go on and move on one step higher into advanced injection and start invoking what we call as stored procedures. Invoking stored procedures, escalating yourself from the database into the LAN and stuff like that. Running a command prompt, things like that. You could also now use blind SQL injection. Blind SQL injection is dangerous because it works on sites that have obviously protected or fixed the basic injections, right? Where you no longer use a box, you now use a URL. So you now, for example, run a URL, let's say abc.com, and let's say you've got login dot let's say ASP, yeah, and you pipe in, let's say, username equals to, and then you put in the same syntax in the URL bar, and then you'd say this and password equals to this. So it's the same thing, but then again the only difference is, of course, blind injections are a little bit more complex. You ask the database server a particular question, and you'd say, if it's true, please wait for 5 seconds. If it waits for 5 seconds and then it returns back an error, that means it's true, right? So they would now look at this and go on a loop and start finding out how many columns are there in the table, what type of table it is, and then start injecting statements. This is pretty dangerous because all you need is just Google, right? Let me just show you a simple example. Again, an average guy could just go to Google and say, you know, I want to probably look at a particular site, maybe pick up a country name. I want to watch cinemas, and maybe Malaysia, right? And maybe look at login pages, right? Just Google is all you need, and you'll find all the login pages of different sites, right? And then now use this to attack the site, right? So that's basically, in a nutshell, how SQL injection and cross-site scripting works. And a combination of this two was what was used to create Lisa Moon. Right? A simple example or a simple query of something like this would give you all the sites that are pretty much vulnerable to Lisa Moon. For example, if I were to search for a script source, right? I think you recognize this script from the cross-site scripting, yeah? And close script tag. This ur.php is something that's specific to Lisa Moon, right? And you'd see all the different sites. Now, you'd find that a lot of these sites are actually based in the US that have been vulnerable. And if I were to search for, the second largest country was China and India, right? Because of obviously the number of internet users on those sites. If I were to now put this in and say, I want to know all the sites in China that are vulnerable, you'd find tons of sites down here that are actually vulnerable to Lisa Moon. All these sites are vulnerable to Lisa Moon. They've been attacked, all right? And you could see the number of screen. There are lots of results, all right? There's about 3,390 results in China alone, all right? And of course, this is only Lisa Moon. They've got different variations of the URL, yeah? So they've got different URLs down there. If to just search ur.php, for example, you'd find a lot more. There's about 69,000 results of sites. These are safari parks that are vulnerable, tour companies, and stuff like that. And same goes with India as well. You'll find lots of sites in India that are also vulnerable to Lisa Moon. All right, and you would find education groups, websites, even certs, yeah, that are also vulnerable for that. And the sad part is, while the company may think that nothing has actually been stolen from my website, but you've now become a platform for innocent users to be attacked. Right? So that's Lisa Moon, cross-site scripting, and SQL injection in a nutshell.